Hi everyone, my name is Maya Whitfield. I'm 31 years old, and until 8 months ago I thought I had the kind of life people quietly envied. Good marriage, good job. A best friend I'd known since we were 19, who I trusted with literally everything, including 3 weeks before all of this happened, the fact that I was pregnant. I'm telling you this story because I need to get it out of my body. I've told it to my lawyer. I've told it to a grief counselor I started seeing in February. I've told it in pieces to my mother, who still can't say either of their names out loud without her jaw tightening. But I've never told it from the beginning, start to finish, the way it actually happened. So bear with me, this is long because it deserves to be long. Nothing about what happened to me was quick. I want to start with something that's going to sound strange, given everything I'm about to tell you. I want to start with how much I loved my husband. Not thought I loved, not believed I loved. I loved Daniel Whitfield the way you love someone you've built an entire decade around. We met in a coffee shop in Austin when I was 23 and he was 25, both of us broke, both of us scared of our own futures in that specific way people are in their early 20s. When adulthood feels like a costume you haven't grown into yet. He spilled his coffee on my laptop bag. I made him buy me a replacement bag as a joke. He actually did it, showed up 2 days later with a bag that was, somehow, exactly my taste, which should have told me something about how observant he was. Except I read it as romantic instead of what it eventually became, which was useful. We dated for 2 years, married for 7, and for almost all of those 7 years I would have told you without hesitation that Daniel was a good man. Not a perfect one, he could be passive when he should have been decisive. He avoided conflict like it was a physical threat. He had this habit of going quiet for days when he was stressed instead of just telling me what was wrong. But good, steady. The kind of man my grandmother, who'd been married 51 years before my grandfather passed, looked at and said, "He's not flashy. But he's not going anywhere." She meant it as the highest compliment she had. I think about that a lot now. He's not going anywhere, he went somewhere. So let me tell you about Jenna, because you can't understand the size of what happened without understanding the size of what she was to me. Jenna Castellano and I met our sophomore year of college, in a mandatory statistics class neither of us wanted to take. She sat next to me because, in her words years later, "You looked like you also didn't want to be there and I needed an ally." We were inseparable within a month. She was maid of honor at my wedding. I was maid of honor at hers, 4 years later, before her marriage ended in a divorce that I helped her survive, driving to her apartment at 2 in the morning more than once, holding her hair back. Paying for a locksmith when she needed her ex out of her apartment for good. I have 11 years of memories with this woman that have nothing to do with men, nothing to do with romance, just 2 women who loved each other in the specific, ferocious way women love their oldest friends. When I found out I was pregnant, and I want you to understand, this wasn't a casual pregnancy, this was 4 years of trying, 2 rounds of fertility testing. 1 early miscarriage at 9 weeks that nearly destroyed me. The first person I told, before my own mother, before Daniel even, for about 6 hours, was Jenna. I called her from the bathroom of a CVS parking lot, sitting in my car with the test in a paper bag on the passenger seat like contraband, and said, "Jenna, I need you to not say anything. I need you to just listen." And then I started crying so hard I couldn't talk, and she stayed on the phone with me for 40 minutes saying nothing but I'm here, I'm here. Take your time, until I could finally say the word pregnant. I'm telling you all of this not to make you like me. I'm telling you this so you understand exactly how much trust I had built with both of these people over years, slowly, the way trust is supposed to be built. So that when I tell you what happened next, you understand it wasn't a small betrayal, it wasn't even a medium one. It was a betrayal calibrated, almost surgically, to hit every single thing I had ever trusted in my life on the same night at the same table. If you've ever had a moment where 2 separate parts of your life collided in a way that broke something permanently, you already know there's a before and an after, and the line between them is usually a single hour, sometimes a single minute. Mine was about 90 seconds. I'll get there, I promise I'll get there. But I need you to walk through the weeks leading up to it with me first, because I've replayed those weeks more times than I can count, looking for the signs I missed. And I think you deserve to look for them too. Our 7th anniversary was on a Friday in late October. I'd been planning the dinner for almost a month. I wanted it to be at Lucia's, this small Italian place downtown where Daniel and I had our actual first date 8 years before everything. It wasn't fancy checkered tablecloths, candles stuck in old wine bottles, a owner named Frank who still remembered us from year to year and always comped us a dessert. It mattered to me that it be that restaurant specifically, because I wanted the announcement to feel like it was happening inside the same story that started us. Not some generic five-star place that could have been anywhere. I'd booked the private back table 3 weeks in advance. I'd ordered a small custom dessert, a single slice of tiramisu with Daddy written across the plate in chocolate sauce, because I am, apparently, a person who thought that was clever and not at all going to end up being one of the most painful details of this entire story. I'd bought a card. I'd practiced in the shower in the car, half asleep at 11 at night, exactly how I wanted to say it. I wanted to hold his hands across the table and say, I have something to tell you and I need you to not freak out, but also I really need you to freak out a little, because that was our humor. That specific blend of warning someone and teasing them at the same time. And because I am, apparently, also a person who cannot hold a secret like this alone for very long, I told Jenna about 3 weeks before the dinner. I told her the plan in detail, the restaurant, the dessert, the timing, because some small, embarrassing part of me wanted her to be excited with me in real time. Wanted a second person on the planet to know what was coming before it happened. She cried on the phone, real tears or what I believed were real tears. She said, Maya, after everything you went through, after the miscarriage, God, you deserve this so much, and I remember feeling so loved in that moment. So completely held by the two most important relationships in my life that I genuinely thought, this is it, this is the good part of my life starting. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I think a lot of people watching this know exactly what that feeling is. The feeling right before everything breaks when it actually feels the most solid. That's not an accident, by the way. I've read enough now, talked to enough people, to understand that the moment right before a major betrayal often feels unusually peaceful, because the person doing the betraying is also frequently working overtime to keep you calm and unsuspecting. I didn't understand that yet. I would understand it very soon. Here's something I didn't notice at the time, but I noticed almost immediately once I started looking backward. About 4 months before the dinner, Daniel started working late twice a week, sometimes 3, nothing dramatic. No lipstick on a collar, no perfume that wasn't mine, nothing out of a movie. Just a slow creep. 6 o'clock became 7, became 7:30, became don't wait up for dinner. He worked in commercial insurance underwriting, a job with genuinely unpredictable busy seasons. So there was always a reasonable explanation sitting right there, ready to be used. Quarter end, renewal season, a client account that was a nightmare right now. I believed every one of those explanations because why wouldn't I? 7 years of marriage doesn't make you suspicious by default, it makes you trusting by default. That's the whole point of 7 years. Jenna, around that same period, started being a little harder to reach. Not absent, she still texted, still showed up for our usual Sunday coffee about half the time, but there was a new kind of distraction in her. A habit of glancing at her phone mid-conversation, in a way that felt different from her normal phone glancing. I noticed it, I clocked it in the back of my mind the way you clock a strange noise in your house and decide it's probably nothing. I asked her once lightly, are you seeing someone? You've got a vibe, and she laughed too quickly. I'd realized later and said, God, no, I'm just stressed about work, and I let it go because why would I push? That's the thing nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It's not that the signs aren't there, it's that the signs only assemble themselves into a shape after the fact. Before the fact, they're just noise. Ordinary, forgettable noise scattered across months, each piece small enough to explain away on its own. About 6 weeks before the anniversary, there was a moment I now think of as the first real crack, even though at the time it barely registered as anything. I needed to transfer some money between accounts to cover a slightly larger than usual property tax payment. And I logged into our joint savings account, the one we'd had since year 2 of our marriage. The one we both called the house fund, because we were saving for a down payment on a place outside the city, and the balance was lower than I expected. Not dramatically lower, about $4,000 lower than my mental math said it should be. I did what most people do. I assumed I'd miscounted, or that Daniel had paid something out of it that he hadn't mentioned, a car repair, a medical bill, something boring and explainable. I texted him, hey, did you pull anything from savings recently? Trying to figure out the math on this tax payment. He responded about 3 hours later, oh yeah, had to cover some stuff for my dad's roof, totally forgot to tell you, sorry. I'll explain tonight. He did explain that night over dinner with a level of detail that looking back was almost too smooth. His father's roof had a leak. The contractor wanted a deposit before scheduling. His dad was embarrassed to ask for help directly, so Daniel had just handled it quietly. It was a believable story. His father genuinely was the kind of proud, old-fashioned man who'd rather lose a roof than ask his son for money outright. The story fit. It fit so well that I didn't think about it again for almost 2 months. I'm telling you about the money now, out of order, because you need to have it sitting in the back of your mind the way it should have been sitting in mine. I didn't find out the full truth about the money until much later, until after the dinner, until after everything fell apart and I started digging with the specific, focused fury of someone who finally has a reason to stop giving the benefit of the doubt. But the withdrawals had already been happening for over a year by that point. I just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks before the dinner, Jenna asked me an odd question. We were at her apartment, sharing a bottle of wine. While she was drinking, I was sipping sparkling water and pretending it was the same thing. Since I hadn't told anyone but her and Daniel that I was pregnant yet, and she asked, almost casually, "Are you and Daniel doing okay?" Like, really okay. I remember laughing, actually laughing and saying, "We're great, why?" And she said, "No reason, I just feel like marriages get weird around the 7-year mark, that's all." I read something about it, and changed the subject so fast that I didn't have time to feel strange about it until days afterward. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes this story worth telling instead of just another rage-bait drama. I have asked myself over and over whether that question was guilt trying to surface, some last flicker of conscience in Jenna reaching for the truth before it became too late to say it. Or whether it was something colder, a kind of probing, checking whether I suspected anything, testing the temperature of the water she and Daniel were already swimming in together. I don't know which one it was. I'll probably never know because I never gave her the chance to explain herself. You'll understand why by the end of this. 1 week before the dinner, Daniel did something that, in hindsight, should have been the loudest alarm bell of the entire 18 months, and at the time felt like nothing more than a sweet, slightly awkward gesture. He came home with flowers, not for any occasion, just flowers on a random Tuesday, the kind of thing that should make a wife feel cherished. He said while handing them to me, "I just wanted you to know I've been a little distant lately, work's been insane, and I know that's not fair to you. I love you. I'm sorry I've been checked out." I cried, grateful, and told him he had nothing to apologize for, that I understood that I loved him too. I felt in that moment like our marriage had just gotten stronger, like he'd noticed his own distance and corrected course before it became a real problem. I didn't know, obviously, that this was the night before he and Jenna had a trip planned. I found that out from a hotel receipt 3 months later, a Tuesday to Wednesday booking one night, a hotel 40 minutes outside the city. The kind of place you'd only choose specifically because it's far enough from anyone who knows you to run into. The flowers were an apology for something I didn't know had happened yet. I want you to really sit with that because it took me weeks of therapy to be able to say it out loud without my hands shaking. He apologized in advance, almost smoothed the path before he walked it. Or maybe he apologized after, the morning after, racing home with flowers to cover the smell of guilt. Either way, the flowers weren't about distance. The flowers were about access. He needed me soft and reassured so I wouldn't look too closely at anything for a while longer. If you've ever gotten an unexplained, oddly timed gesture of love from someone right before you found out something terrible, I want you to comment below. Because I think this happens to more people than anyone talks about, and it's one of the cruelest mechanics of betrayal, the way it borrows the language of love to buy itself more time. Okay, the dinner. I want to walk you through this slowly because it is the center of everything, and because I have relived it so many times that I can tell you exactly what the air smelled like. It was October 24th, crisp, cold-edged fall evening, the kind where you can see your breath a little if you stand outside too long. I wore a deep green dress that Daniel had once told me years earlier was his favorite color on me. I chose it deliberately, thinking, I want him to remember this night for the rest of his life. I had no idea how right I was going to be, for reasons that had nothing to do with the dress. I got to Lucia's 40 minutes early to set everything up myself. Frank, the owner, helped me arrange a small bouquet of white ranunculus on the table, Daniel's favorite flower, which he'd mentioned offhand on our second date and which I'd remembered for 8 years. I placed the card I'd written on his side of the table, propped against his water glass. I told the server quietly in advance about the dessert timing. I wanted the tiramisu with Daddy written on it to come out after our entrees, not before. So I could say the words out loud first and let the dessert be the visual exclamation point. I sat there alone for those 40 minutes, feeling something I can only describe now as the calmest kind of happy I've ever been in my life. I texted my mom, "Tonight's the night, wish me luck," and she sent back a string of heart emojis that I still, honestly, can't look at without my chest tightening. Daniel had told me he'd be coming straight from work. Jenna wasn't supposed to be there at all, she didn't know I'd want her there, and frankly, the dinner wasn't for her, it was for Daniel and me. I had no plan, no expectation, no reason on earth to think she'd be walking through that door. At 7:52 p.m., I know the exact time because I checked my phone out of nervous habit right before it happened. I saw two figures through the restaurant's front window, walking up from the parking lot together. For about 3 full seconds, my brain did something strange and almost funny in retrospect. It tried to assemble an innocent explanation before I'd even fully processed who I was looking at. Oh, that's nice, Jenna must be stopping by to say congrats before she heads out. Maybe Daniel called her, maybe they ran into each other outside, then I saw the way they were walking. Not side by side like two friends who happened to arrive at the same place, together. The specific, practiced rhythm of two people who have spent the last 20 minutes in a car alone, who know each other's pace, who aren't performing anything for an audience, because they don't yet know there's an audience watching through a restaurant window. Jenna had her hand resting briefly on the small of Daniel's back as they crossed the street, the kind of touch that's so automatic it doesn't even register as a choice anymore. The kind of touch a wife gives a husband, the kind of touch I gave him. I want to be honest about something here because I think it's important. In that exact moment, before either of them saw me, before anything was said, I already knew. Some part of me, some old, animal, pre-verbal part of the brain that exists specifically to protect you from threats, already knew exactly what I was looking at. It wasn't confusion. It was confirmation of something I think I'd been quietly, unconsciously sensing for months, the way you sense a storm coming before the sky actually changes color. They walked in. The hostess greeted them. Frank had told the front staff which table was mine, so a young server immediately started walking them toward the back, toward me. Toward the flowers and the card, and the dessert with my husband's new title written across it in chocolate sauce. I watched my husband's face when he saw me sitting there, dressed up, candlelight on the table, and I watched it do something I will never forget for the rest of my life. It didn't light up. It didn't even look surprised in the normal way. It went very briefly, almost imperceptibly, gray. The specific color of a man who has just realized two timelines he believed were separate have suddenly, catastrophically become the same timeline. Jenna's face did something different. Hers went still, frozen, almost the face of someone running rapid calculations behind their eyes, trying to figure out in real time what story could possibly explain this and finding nothing. Nobody said anything for what felt like an extremely long time but was probably 4 or 5 seconds. I broke it. I don't know where the calm came from. I think it was shock, honestly, your body's way of buying you time before the real feeling arrives, but I said, in a voice that came out steadier than I had any right to expect, wow. I wasn't expecting both of you. Daniel's mouth opened and closed once before anything came out. Maya, hey, I ran into Jenna in the parking lot. We weren't planning this, Jenna said quickly, too quickly, talking over him. I swear this is just a coincidence. I had no idea you guys were. And that's when the valet, a college-aged kid named, I'd later learn Marcus. Completely unaware he was about to detonate the last fragile wall of the lie, leaned into the conversation with the easy, helpful tone of someone trying to be polite. He looked at Daniel and said, hey, you guys want me to grab your bags from the car, or are you heading straight back to the Wexford after dinner? Silence. The specific, total silence of a room where every adult present suddenly understands exactly what has just been said, except for the one person who said it, who is still smiling. Waiting for an answer to what he thinks is a perfectly normal question. The Wexford was a hotel, 20 minutes outside downtown. I'd driven past it 100 times and never once had a reason to think about it. I looked at my husband. I looked at my best friend of 15 years. Neither of them said a word. Daniel's gray face had gone now to something closer to white. Jenna had her hand pressed flat against her own collarbone, the way you press a hand against a wound. I want to tell you that I screamed. I want to tell you I threw the water glass, or stood up and slapped someone, or said something devastating and perfect, the kind of line you only think of 3 days later in the shower. I didn't do any of that. I stood up slowly, smoothed down the front of my green dress with both hands, a small, stupid, automatic gesture. Like I was preparing to walk into a meeting instead of out of the wreckage of my marriage, and I said very quietly, I need you both to not follow me, and I walked out. I drove 4 blocks before I had to pull over, because I genuinely could not see the road anymore. I sat in my car outside a closed dry cleaners in the dark, with my hand pressed against my stomach, and I cried in a way I don't think I've ever cried before or since, not loud, not dramatic. Just this low, steady, endless leaking, like something inside me had simply cracked open and would not stop. I had been 3 weeks pregnant, sitting in that restaurant, ready to tell my husband he was going to be a father, with the one person who'd known the secret before he did sitting 20 feet away. Having apparently spent some unknown number of those same weeks in a hotel room with him. If you've ever felt your entire understanding of your life rearrange itself in under 60 seconds, I think you already know there isn't a word for that feeling. Devastated doesn't cover it. Betrayed doesn't cover it. It's closer to a kind of vertigo. The floor isn't just gone. The whole building you thought you lived in turns out to have never existed in the shape you believed. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a Holiday Inn under my maiden name, called my mother from the parking lot, and told her between gasps what had happened. She didn't say anything for almost 10 full seconds, my mother, who has an opinion about everything, who has never in my life been speechless, and then she said very quietly, okay, baby. I'm coming to you, don't talk to either of them until I get there. I know some of you are already furious, and that anger is fair. I also know there's a version of this story where I drive home that night and confront both of them in a screaming match, with thrown objects and a slammed door and a neighbor calling the police. That's not what happened, and the why matters because it's the whole reason this story ends the way it does. I am, by nature, a planner. It's the same instinct that made me book a restaurant 3 weeks in advance and choreograph an entire evening down to the dessert timing. Somewhere in that hotel room, around 2 in the morning, lying awake with my hand on my still flat stomach, that instinct turned itself toward a different kind of plan entirely. I remember thinking, with a clarity that almost scared me, I am not going to let my rage write the next 6 months of my life. I am going to let my rage fund my lawyer. My mother arrived the next morning. She's a steel-spined, 71-year-old retired school principal who raised 3 kids essentially alone after my father passed when I was 14. And if you want to know where I learned to be calm and terrifying at the same time, it's her. She sat across from me in that hotel room, held both of my hands, and said the sentence I think I needed most in the entire world at that exact moment. You don't owe either of them an explosion. You owe yourself a plan. Over the next 4 days, I didn't speak to Daniel. He called 11 times. He texted things like, please just let me explain, and Maya, I'm begging you. And on day 3, something that made my stomach turn. I never meant for it to go this far, it just happened. You have to believe that what we have is still real. I didn't respond to a single message. Jenna texted exactly twice. The first said, please call me, I need to tell you what really happened. The second, 2 days later, said, I'm so sorry, I know that doesn't mean anything right now. I love you, I'm so sorry. I didn't respond to that one either. I want to be honest, there were hours during those 4 days where the silence felt unbearable, where some old, loyal part of me wanted desperately to call Jenna back, to let her explain. To find some version of this, where my best friend of 15 years hadn't actually done what I knew she'd done. That's the thing about long friendships, they don't disappear just because they should. The love doesn't immediately convert into hatred. It sits there rotting, refusing to leave the body on schedule. But my mother kept saying the same thing every time I wavered. Whatever they tell you right now is for them, not for you. Get your information first, get your feelings later. So that's what I did. On day 2, still at the hotel, I called a lawyer. Her name was Renata Cole. Recommended by a coworker who'd gone through a difficult divorce 2 years earlier and described her as the kind of lawyer who makes you feel like a general instead of a victim. I needed to feel like a general. Renata's first question to me on our initial call wasn't, are you okay, or I'm so sorry. It was, do you have access to your joint financial accounts? And has anything in your husband's behavior around money felt strange in the last year or two? I told her about the $4,000. The roof story, the way it had felt in the moment, slightly too smooth. I want you to pull 24 months of statements from every joint account you have access to, she said. Don't confront him, don't ask him anything, just gather it quietly and send it to me. Can you do that without him knowing? I could. Because for years, I'd been the one who handled our finances, paid the bills, balanced the budget, while Daniel, true to his passive nature, mostly just signed off on whatever I told him needed signing. It is, in hindsight, an almost unbearably ironic detail. The same passivity that made him easy to live with for 7 years was the exact thing that made it laughably simple for me to investigate him without his knowledge. What I found over the next 10 days, working quietly from my mother's house while telling Daniel nothing, while continuing to ignore every call and message from both him and Jenna, broke something in me that I think had still, somehow, been intact until that point. It wasn't $4,000. It was just shy of $31,000, moved out of our joint savings account over 18 months. in amounts that ranged from $300 to just under $5,000 at a time, always under amounts that would trigger an automatic alert. Always timed around plausible excuses I could remember him mentioning. His father's roof, a work conference he'd needed to cover before reimbursement. An investment opportunity with a college friend that didn't pan out, sorry, lesson learned. Each excuse small enough, spaced out enough, boring enough, that no single one had ever felt worth a real argument. Cross-referenced against hotel charges, Renata's financial investigator pulled charges to a card I didn't even know Daniel had, opened in his name only. Statements mailed to his office instead of our house. The pattern wasn't subtle once I could see the whole shape instead of one scattered piece at a time. The Wexford 4 times, a different hotel near the airport twice. A bed and breakfast 90 minutes away. Once, the weekend, he'd told me he was on a guy's fishing trip with a college friend named Patrick who, when I worked up the nerve to text him directly, replied with genuine confusion, "Man, I haven't seen Daniel since your wedding, lol, what fishing trip? 18 months. Almost the exact length of time. It would later turn out that Jenna and Daniel had been involved. I remember sitting at my mother's kitchen table with all of this laid out, bank statements, hotel charges. A spreadsheet I'd built late at night because building it was the only thing keeping my hands busy enough not to shake, and feeling a very specific, cold kind of grief. Not just for the affair, for the years. For every ordinary Tuesday I had spent loving a man who was, during some unknown portion of those Tuesdays, actively constructing a second life funded by money that was supposed to become our child's college account. If you've ever discovered that a betrayal wasn't a single moment, but actually a long, patient construction project, I think you understand exactly the kind of grief I'm describing. And I'd genuinely like to know in the comments how long it took you to find every piece, because for me it was the finding that hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Renata filed for divorce on my behalf 11 days after the dinner. We filed quietly with full financial documentation attached from day one, every withdrawal, every hotel charge, everything, specifically so there would be no room for Daniel's lawyer, whoever that turned out to be, to argue financial confusion or shared decision-making. Renata's exact words to me were, "We're not going to let this become a fight about feelings. We're going to make it a fight about facts, and facts don't lose." Daniel was served at his office. I know that detail because 3 days later he showed up at my mother's house unannounced, parking on the street and walking up the driveway with the specific desperate energy of a man whose careful, slow-motion life has just been hit by something he never saw coming. Despite having spent 18 months building the exact conditions that made it inevitable. My mother answered the door. I watched from the kitchen window as she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, blocking the frame with her entire small, fierce body, and said something to him I couldn't hear. He tried to look past her into the house, clearly hoping to see me. She didn't move. Eventually, I walked to the door myself, because some part of me needed to see his face one more time, needed to hear even briefly whatever pathetic architecture of explanation he'd built in the days since the restaurant. "Maya, please," he said, and his voice cracked in a way that 8 months ago would have undone me completely. "Please just talk to me. I know I messed up. I know what I did was God, I know how bad it looks, but it wasn't what you think. It started as nothing, it just got out of control. I never stopped loving you, I swear to you, not for one single day. I want you to notice something in that sentence because I noticed it immediately and it has stuck with me ever since. It started as nothing, it just got out of control. Not I chose this repeatedly for 18 months, not I lied to your face while taking money out of our shared account. Just a soft, passive, weather pattern kind of language. The language of someone who wants you to believe things happened to him rather than because of him. You took $31,000 from our savings," I said. Not a question, just a fact laid down between us like a card on a table. His face did something complicated, guilt, yes, but also underneath it, a flicker of something that looked almost like relief. The relief of a person who's been waiting for the other shoe to drop and is almost grateful it's finally happening, because at least now he doesn't have to keep balancing on one foot. "I was going to pay it back," he said. "I swear to God, Maya, I had a plan." "Was the plan before or after I found out?" I asked. He didn't answer that. He didn't have an answer for that because there wasn't one that wouldn't make things worse. "I'm pregnant," I told him then. I don't know exactly why I chose that moment to say it, except that I think some part of me needed him to know, needed there to be a record, however brief, of him hearing it directly from me instead of finding out secondhand through legal paperwork later. 3 weeks the night of the dinner, that's what I was going to tell you. I watched the blood actually leave his face. A genuine physical reaction. He swayed slightly, put one hand against the doorframe to steady himself, and for one disorienting second I felt something close to pity, not forgiveness. Not softening, just the specific, exhausted pity you feel for someone who has just realized in real time the full size of what they've destroyed. Maya, he said, and his voice had gone very small. I didn't know, I swear to you I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said, that's not really the point anymore. I closed the door. My mother, standing just behind me, put a hand on my back and didn't say anything at all, which I think was exactly the right amount of words for that moment. He didn't come back after that. He sent one more message about a week later, through his own lawyer instead of directly, which Renata told me was actually a positive development. It meant he'd finally accepted that direct appeals weren't going to work, which meant the negotiations could move into a more procedural, less emotionally exhausting phase. I don't know exactly when Daniel told Jenna I knew everything. I don't know if he told her at all or if she found out through other channels. I genuinely do not know, to this day, what conversations happened between the two of them in the weeks after that dinner, and I've made a kind of peace with not knowing. Because chasing that knowledge would have meant staying connected to both of them, in a way I had already decided I couldn't survive. Here's where the second twist comes in, the one I didn't see coming even after everything else. About 6 weeks after the dinner, I was deep into the divorce process by then, living in a small one-bedroom apartment I'd signed a lease on the week after I filed. Building a life that didn't require either of them in it, I got a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. It turned out to be Priya, a mutual friend of mine and Jenna's, someone I'd always liked but hadn't been especially close to. The text said, "Hey, I don't know if it's my place, but I think you'd want to know, Jenna told a few people at Megan's birthday dinner that she's pregnant. I'm so sorry if this isn't something you wanted to hear about, but I felt weird knowing and not telling you." I sat with that message for a long time before responding. I felt strangely less shocked by this than I had been by almost anything else, because by that point my capacity for shock had a ceiling, and I'd hit it weeks earlier. What I felt instead was a kind of grim, exhausted confirmation, the final piece of a puzzle I'd already mostly assembled in my head, even without wanting to admit it. I asked Priya carefully whether there'd been anything said about how far along Jenna was. Priya thought she'd mentioned a little over 2 months, though she wasn't certain. I did the math. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Sitting alone in my new apartment at 11 o'clock at night with a cup of decaf tea going cold in my hands. 2 months before that birthday dinner put Jenna's pregnancy squarely within the window, overlapping almost exactly with the Wexford Hotel charges. Right around the time Daniel had given me flowers and apologized for being distant. I never asked Jenna directly whether the baby was Daniel's. I want to be completely honest about that, because I know some of you are going to want a dramatic confirmation scene, a moment where I corner her and demand the truth. That scene doesn't exist in this story, because I made a deliberate choice not to create it. What I did hear, again secondhand, through Priya, who I think had appointed herself the unofficial messenger of this entire situation, was that Jenna herself reportedly wasn't certain who the father was. That she'd been seeing someone else around the same period, a man from her gym whose name I never learned and have no interest in learning, and that the timing was, in her own words to a mutual friend, complicated. I remember laughing when I heard that word. A short, ugly, surprised laugh, alone in my apartment, the kind that comes out when something is both completely absurd and completely unsurprising at once. Complicated. My husband had spent 18 months and $31,000 of our shared savings on a woman who, in the end, couldn't even say with certainty whose child she was carrying. There's a cosmic, almost cruel irony in that detail I didn't know how to feel about for a long time, somewhere between vindication and a fresh wave of grief. Because no matter how the math worked out, it meant my husband had been willing to risk everything for something that, in the end, wasn't even guaranteed to be his. I think this is the part of the story where a lot of people expect the dramatic confrontation to finally happen. The scene where I storm into Jenna's apartment, or show up at her work, or send the long, righteous text message laying out every single thing she did, every lie. Every year of friendship she cashed in for 18 months of secrecy. I know that's the satisfying scene. I know that's the scene this kind of story is supposed to build toward. I didn't do that either. And I want to explain why, because I think the why is actually the most important part of this whole story, more important than the betrayal itself. Somewhere in those weeks, in therapy, in long conversations with my mother, in the quiet, exhausted hours of building a life as a newly single, newly pregnant woman, I came to understand something about confrontation that I don't think I fully understood before. Confrontation, the dramatic kind, the kind where you say everything you've been holding in, almost always serves the person doing the confronting more than it serves any kind of justice. It feels powerful in the moment. It rarely changes anything that actually matters. And worse, it keeps you tethered to the person you're confronting, gives them one more scene where they get to see your pain, react to it, maybe even twist it, maybe even make you somehow the unreasonable one for being too harsh, too cold, too dramatic about it. I didn't want to give either of them one more minute of my emotional energy than they had already taken. I wanted my silence to be the consequence. I wanted the absence of explanation to be the punishment, so here's what actually happened instead. In March, 4 months after the dinner, an invitation arrived at my apartment, forwarded, I assume, from my old address, since I hadn't yet told everyone in our shared social circle that I'd moved. It was a baby shower invitation. Soft sage green cardstock, hand-painted leaves along the border, Jenna's baby shower in delicate script at the top, a date in May, a registry link at the bottom. I want you to understand the layers of what that envelope meant, sitting in my hands in my new kitchen. Jenna had, apparently, either not yet told whoever was organizing the shower that anything had changed between us, or simply hadn't thought to remove me from a guest list built months earlier. Back when we were still each other's person, back when an invitation like this would have been the most natural thing in the world. I sat at my kitchen table holding that invitation for a long time. I won't pretend there wasn't a flicker of something complicated in me, not longing for the friendship back, exactly, but a kind of grief for the version of this event that should have existed in a different timeline, the one where Jenna and I were just two women who'd both, coincidentally, gotten pregnant around the same time, the one where I would have actually wanted to go, would have brought a ridiculous, oversized gift, would have cried happy tears watching her open onesies. That timeline didn't exist anymore. It had never really existed at all, I realized. It had just been a story I was telling myself based on incomplete information. I thought about ignoring the invitation completely. I thought about a dozen different things I could write back, ranging from icy to devastating. In the end, I wrote the simplest thing I could think of, because by that point in this whole ordeal, simplicity felt like the only language I trusted myself to use without it spiraling into something I'd regret. I bought a plain card, cream-colored, no flowers, no cute printed phrase on the front. Inside, in my own handwriting, I wrote, "Thank you for the invitation. I won't be able to make it, but I wish you all the best." That was it. No signature beyond my first name, no explanation, no accusation, no closure, no final word delivered with dramatic flourish. I mailed it the next day, and as far as I know, that small cream-colored card is the last piece of direct communication that has ever passed between Jenna and me. I didn't go to the shower, obviously. I don't know who attended, or what was said, or whether anyone there knew the full story behind my absence, or whether Jenna simply told people I couldn't make it, and let everyone assume whatever they wanted. I genuinely don't know, and for the first time in this entire story, not knowing didn't feel like an open wound. It felt like a closed door, which is different, and which I needed far more than I needed answers. I want to talk for a minute about what no contact actually looked like in practice, because I think people throw that phrase around online without explaining the mechanics of it. And the mechanics matter. No contact meant blocking both of their numbers, which felt strangely anticlimactic the first time I did it. Just two quiet taps on a screen, the same motion you'd use to block a spam caller. It meant unfollowing, then blocking, both of their social media accounts, including the slow process of going through years of tagged photos and either untagging myself or, in a few cases I'm not proud of, just deleting posts entirely, because I couldn't stand the thought of some algorithm resurfacing a photo of the three of us at a barbecue 4 years earlier. All of us laughing, none of us knowing yet what was coming. It also meant an extremely uncomfortable conversation with several mutual friends, explaining in the vaguest terms I could manage that I needed them to stop relaying information to me about either Daniel or Jenna, even well-intentioned information. Priya, to her credit, respected that the moment I asked. A couple of others took longer, kept mentioning small updates out of habit before catching themselves, before I gently but firmly reminded them I genuinely didn't want to know. No contact meant, at my father-in-law's funeral 11 months later. Yes, that happened too. Life doesn't politely pause for your grief, sitting in the back of the church instead of with the family. Because Daniel was, obviously, family in the way that mattered for seating charts, and I was not anymore in the way that mattered for anything. I went because I had genuinely loved that man, who had always treated me with a gruff, old-fashioned warmth, who once spent an entire Thanksgiving teaching me how to properly carve a turkey because In his words, every Whitfield should know how to do this, blood or not. I sat in the back, didn't approach the family afterward, and left before the reception. Daniel saw me, our eyes met across the church for one brief, charged second, and he gave a small, almost pleading nod. I gave nothing back at all. That was the last time I ever saw his face in person. People imagine going no contact as a single dramatic decision you make once. It isn't. It's 100 small decisions, repeated and rechosen, sometimes painfully, for months, until eventually it stops being a decision at all and just becomes the shape of your life. The divorce finalized in July, 9 months after the dinner. Because of the financial documentation Renata had built the case around from day one, the spreadsheet, the hotel charges, the 18 months of unexplained withdrawals. All laid out with dates and amounts and bank statements that left absolutely no room for ambiguity. The settlement wasn't even close to contested in the way these things sometimes are. Daniel's lawyer reportedly told him, according to a detail Renata shared with me afterward almost gently, that fighting the financial terms in court would likely just expose more of what he'd done to a judge, and possibly to a wider public record, and that taking the settlement quietly was, frankly, his best option. I came out of that marriage with the house. We'd actually managed to buy one 2 years before everything fell apart, with money that miraculously hadn't been touched by his secret withdrawals, full ownership of our joint savings going forward, since the $31,000 he'd taken was treated as a debt he owed back to the marital estate, and an agreement that he would contribute to child support and medical costs in a way that was, by Renata's professional assessment, about as airtight as these things get. I don't want to pretend the money fixed anything because it didn't, not the part that actually hurt. But there is a very specific kind of relief in not having to also worry about whether you can afford diapers while you're already grieving the family you thought you were building. Renata once told me in one of our final meetings, the legal system can't give you back what you lost emotionally, but it can make sure you're not also drowning financially while you grieve it. I think about that sentence a lot. My daughter was born in late June, 3 weeks before the divorce officially finalized. I named her Alina after my grandmother, the same grandmother who used to say Daniel wasn't flashy, but he wasn't going anywhere. I think about that phrase sometimes, holding Alina at 2 in the morning during a feeding, and I feel a complicated kind of laugh rise up in me. Not bitter exactly. Just the dark humor of someone who's lived long enough to watch a beloved relative's confident prediction get completely upended by reality. He went somewhere, Grandma. He just didn't take us with him. I want to be honest about something, because I think the internet rewards stories that end in clean, total triumph. And I don't want to give you a fake version of peace just because it makes for a better ending. There are still hard days. There's still a kind of grief that has nothing to do with Daniel specifically, and everything to do with the life I thought I was going to have, the version where my husband and my best friend are. Both at my daughter's first birthday party, where the 4 of us eventually grow up as some kind of extended, chaotic, loving family unit. That life was never going to exist, I understand that now. But some nights I still grieve the idea of it the way you'd grieve a person, because in a way it was a person, it was the future self I expected to become. And she died on October 24th in a restaurant with white ranunculus on the table, even though my body kept walking around afterward, still very much alive. I don't know what happened to Jenna's baby, whether it was Daniel's or not, whether she ever found out for certain, whether Daniel knows or has ever asked. I decided very early on that this was the one piece of information I was never going to chase, because chasing it would have meant staying tied to a story that I needed to be finished with. There's a strange kind of power in choosing not to know something, in deciding your own peace matters more than your own curiosity. I won't pretend that choice was easy. Some days it still isn't. But I've kept it for 8 months now, and I intend to keep it for the rest of my life. I've moved twice since the divorce, both times into apartments that have nothing to do with the life Daniel and I built. I changed jobs about 4 months ago, partly for a fresh start, partly because my old job had too many small overlaps with people who still knew both of them. I see a therapist every other week, Dr. Aldridge, who once told me the truest thing anyone has said to me through this entire process. You're not just grieving a marriage and a friendship, you're grieving your own judgment. You're grieving the version of yourself who trusted completely, because that version got hurt very badly and some part of you is scared to ever be her again. That part is still healing. I won't lie and tell you it's fully healed 8 months out with a